Y'all ready? They say you can tell a lot about a man by the car he drives, or the company he keeps. I think you can tell a lot about a man by the things he masturbates to. I grew up Catholic and even served time as an altar boy. Masturbation was a sin and carried the threat of eternal damnation. But telling a boy to not touch his penis is like telling a priest not to touch boys. My dad didn't own any porn magazines, at least none that I could find under his bed or in the garage. And I grew up in the era before the internet. So the lack of material required of me a level of flexibility and invention that would make Thomas Edison proud. I have an older sister who loved romance novels. Her room was littered with them. Books which had on its cover illustrations of beautiful women in the arms of long-haired, muscular men. When I perused those books for the first time, something stirred within me. Embedded within the text were scenes of passion that were magical to my virginal mind. Understand that at the time I was reading books like Encyclopedia Brown and Little House on the Prairie. So my sister's books opened a secret door to what Ma and Pa were doing when Laura Ingalls was catching frogs by the pond. The books bordered on erotica, but the language was not overtly vulgar or graphic. Instead of hard cocks, the men had willing members, which entered a woman's moist opening, which sounds like something at a Betty Crocker convention. The lack of vulgarity made it more acceptable for a 10-year-old Catholic boy with no experience. And this lack of experience provided a more fertile ground for his imagination. Whenever my sisters were out of the house, I'd grab one of these books and hide in the bathroom. I became really good at scanning the pages like a Google search engine, looking for keywords like lips, thigh, and caress. The problem was I couldn't just jump into the sex. I needed some literary foreplay. And by that I mean the tryst had to have some context. Are they married or is it an affair? Was it a one-night stand or were they on the regular? What did she look like? What was she wearing? Why risk everything for a moment of passion? This need for context proved problematic. Privacy was a premium in a house with 4 sisters and 2 brothers. So really, the only time I had to myself in these books were when my sisters had choir practice. While they were singing hallelujah, I was praising the literary gods, one stroke at a time. Of all the books, I fell hard for Sophie's Choice. You know. Because it was made into a movie, Meryl Streep adorned its cover. Her dreamy face and red ruby lips wasn't so much erotic as it was an invitation to get to know her better. Sophie was a Polish immigrant who escaped an Auschwitz concentration camp and married an American man who was physically abusive. She has a torrid affair with their neighbor Stingo. Their romance was electric, and spoiler alert, it ends in suicide. But that contextual layer made the sex even more existential. In the privacy of my bathroom, I gave new meaning to the term used book. And because Sophie herself was abused, the extramarital affair was okay, even justified. It made her a sympathetic character. And you even felt sorry for Stingo. Yes, he was banging a married woman, but he had his own demons. After all, he was a struggling writer. I cheated on Sophie when Maria entered the picture, a real-life girlfriend of my cousin Jimmy who lived with us during my descent into puberty. Jimmy was something of a role model for me. He had a car and Maria. who was a cross between Rosie Perez and Jennifer Lopez. For a pimpled teenager whose sex life revolved around a fictional character in a novel, Maria became the centerpiece of my wet daydreams. She never said a word to me, which made our relationship one-sided. But the wall separating Jimmy's bedroom from mine was two-sided. When he snuck her into the house in the middle of the night, Maria spoke to me in slow, soft gasps. Her oohs and ahs were like Morse code. My fingers roamed up and down the length of my shaft like reading Braille. Desperate to decode a secret message that only Maria and I understood. As I got older, more material became available to me. The first time I saw a vagina was watching Revenge of the Nerds with my friends. It was kind of shocking, to be honest. I had built up a woman's vagina in my head to be some divine superintelligence, her entrance paved with glitter and gold. But all I saw was a mound of hair, like one of those chia pets on late night infomercials. A woman's nether regions grew even more mysterious, so I retreated to my sister's books to bury my face in something more familiar. In college, I landed a job working the graveyard shift at 7-Eleven. For long stretches in the night, I was left alone with a walk-in fridge full of soda and beer, aisles of potato chips and slabs of beef jerky, and a magazine rack full of hustlers and playboys. I went from having to read my porn to unfettered access to the likes of Pamela Anderson and Jenny McCarthy. Armed with a door chime and a bathroom all to myself, I redefined what it meant to work for minimum wage with fringe benefits. By the time internet porn was freely accessible to me, I was out of my parents' house and in medical school. It was like giving an alcoholic the keys to Bevmo, except the shelves were lined with medical textbooks. I was buried in them. There wasn't much time for pleasure, except The Time Traveler's Wife. Not considered erotica, but well written with an awesome story. The protagonist is Henry, who has a genetic disorder that allows him to time travel. He falls in love with Claire, a beautiful redhead. Their romance comes with an interesting twist. They met for the first time when he was 36 years old, and she was 6. Yes, it's your basic grooming story, but by bending the time-space continuum, it was acceptable. This book came at a crucial time in my life. To focus on studying for the boards, I decided not to go home for Christmas. I was lonely and stuck in the frozen tundra of Burlington, Vermont. This book provided an escape. When I wasn't memorizing human anatomy, I delighted in Henry's exploration of Claire's anatomy. It scratched an itch, like a night with a hooker in Bangkok, but some itches last forever. The confluence of pornography and my passion for books can be distilled into 4 words: 50 Shades of Grey. While I'm ashamed to admit that it sits on my bookshelf, a complete history of the novels I masturbated to isn't complete without mentioning it. I was a married man when this book came out. It went viral and brought erotica into mainstream. On the pantheon of reading material I took into the bathroom without actually having to go number 2, this rivals Sophie's Choice. The writing sucks, but the premise is so realistic. A young, handsome billionaire seduces an innocent and naive college student. He gets her to sign a contract to be a sex slave. I didn't realize at the time, but it's essentially the biography of Elon Musk and any one of his baby mamas. Even a poorly written book has value. One of its pages is missing, a reminder of what else you can do with the book when you run out of Kleenex. On the other end of the literary spectrum is love in the time of cholera. This is no exaggeration. My second child was conceived because of this book. Let me explain. My wife and I struggled to get pregnant. I had defective sperm. My wife's ovaries were like coal-burning factories in World War II Russia, barely able to keep the lights on. Our situation was so desperate, we resorted to IVF to conceive our first child. Suffocating under the weight of parenthood, with very little sleep and even less sex, I found Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera. The story is set in South America during the cholera epidemic. It paints an epic romance between a man who is a serial philanderer and a woman who marries into wealth and affluence. Because it was such an amazing story, I wanted to share it with my wife. So when I found it on a streaming service, we Netflixed and chilled. My wife and I don't have many kinks, but there's something about a story of unrequited love surrounded by death and dysentery that inspired my two-headed sperm to find her shriveled egg. Call it an immaculate conception, but 9 months later, our second child was born. I don't want to come off as some highbrow masturbator who only gets off from novels. Who only gets off from novels written by Nobel Prize-winning authors. But thanks to all that reading, I learned how to spell www.milf.com. There's no shame in finding comfort in traditional pornography, as have I. But how deep can you really get with Pamela Anderson? I like my porn the way I like a good story. Character development and rising tension before the climax. A resolution with, of course, a happy ending. All I'm saying is, on the coffee table of life, while magazines like Hustlers and Playboys are fun, make room for books like Love in the Time of Cholera. Thank you.